Well, greetings everyone, and welcome once again to another Wednesday night of the Sports Crib. A lot of things to talk about tonight. We got some record-breaking contracts in football and basketball. A little more talk about the NIL, of course, and it's baseball season. A lot of things to talk about as far as Major League Baseball is concerned. Uh, Also, going to talk a little bit with about the NCAAF with Mr. Fan. He'll be on a little bit later with us. Right now, I do see Bill in the queue. Uh, Bill, how are you doing this evening?
Doing well. Hope you are also.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's a little warm out here in California, but
Yes,
not as
it's a
warm as
little
it
warm out here. A little warm everywhere.
is.
Welcome to global warming.
Oh no, that does not exist. Ask my Republican friends.
Yeah,
So,
well, the people of Greece would like to disagree with that assessment, where you can quite literally fry an egg on the sidewalk.
well, it is what it is. I mean, it was. I think the last time we talked, it was 131 degrees in Death Valley. Uh, you know,
Nothing
right.
to see here. Everything's fine.
Yeah, I will say, out here in at least this part of California, uh, we are not as bad as some of the other parts of the country, Texas, even even down in Atlanta and places. It's getting really hot.
Yes.
Yeah, but anyway, this is the sports crib, not the weather report.
Yes,
So,
the weather crib is another day.
um, I know. Let's see. Don said that he's has friends there from out of town. I think Dave's doing some work, but I am expecting Demetrius and Reggie. Um, so let's see what happens. Maybe Mr. Anthony will drop in for a minute. We never know. Let's talk a little baseball here, Bill. As as we know, we don't devote a lot of time to baseball, but we are aware that it is a sport. Right now, all of the interest is actually on what's going to happen with Otani. Uh, it's getting closer to the deadline. No one has really stepped up and said anything yet. But let's see. Let's start off with Mr. Don Snyder, Dan Snyder.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Uh, do you think that I mean, we know about Mr. Sterling, we know about Mrs. Schott, and that, but do you think Dan Snyder has actually been the worst owner in sports history?
Well, he's not even the worst owner in the history of the franchise. So the answer can't be yes. They had to tear down a statue of their original owner, Saddam Hussein style, my friend. So, no, that title will and maybe forever might be held by Mr. George Preston Marshall. I don't know if we have time for me to go through the litany of horror show things that can be said about George Preston Marshall. But I remember first reading about him as a child and, probably 8 or 9 years old. And then I made the mistake of asking my father about him. Now, I knew, even as a child, that my father was not a fan of the Washington franchise. Despite my father was born in New York, but grew up in Surrey County, Virginia. And despite the fact that almost all of our neighbors and the vast majority of our relatives were fans of Washington. A sprinkling of Dallas fans, which I thought was odd in Virginia, but sprinkling of them, I guess they call it America's team thing. But where I grew up, it was people who either were fans of Washington, a few Dallas fans, or because of the Navy and all the other military installations, people who brought their fandom for wherever they were, before where they grew up, where they got, to Virginia Beach or Norfolk. And I made the mistake of asking about George Preston Marshall one time, and my father lit into that man. My father's a calm, reasonable, loving man, but it was clear that he would not have urinated on Mr. George Preston Marshall if he was on fire. So he made it clear. My father used to refer to the team as the Whiteskins because that's what they were when he grew up. My father became a fan of, professional football in probably around 1950 or so. And of course, the team was, and then for another more than a decade, in fact, 13 more years, will continue to be the whitest team, the only all-white team, the last all-white team in the NFL. And George Preston Marshall would have held on to that if not for the fact that there was so much political pressure being put on him, and they were going to lose. Here's what finally did it: revenue, right? That's when it finally hit him. Antitrust exemptions, revenue, all these things are being threatened to pull it out from under him. Bobby Kennedy had personally visited with him and said, you got to do something about this. And so what they eventually did was they traded for Bobby Mitchell from the Cleveland Browns. And Bobby Mitchell, first of all, the man is a living saint. But he talks about his first meeting with George Preston Marshall, asked him about, the state of his marriage and making sure he didn't, run around and, go out at night or drink. He asked him a bunch of intensely personal questions. In fact, some questions that were just flat out inappropriate. And I don't think he used the N-word in that particular engagement, but he definitely referred to him as a nigger, right? He was like, and Darky might have slipped out once or twice. So George Preston Marshall is a terrible, terrible human being. And while I have zero love for Daniel Snyder, one of the worst owners, he certainly deserves to be, he's in contention for one of the worst owners, but he's not the worst owner in the history of the franchise. George Preston Marshall, who was a known womanizer, a inveterate, just virulent racist, and just an awful person in almost every way a person can be awful. So I'll give Dan Snyder credit for attempting to get into the conversation, for doing his best, but the lead that George Preston Marshall had was just too great for him to make up.
Well, yeah, I actually didn't think of Mr. Marshall. Of course, not. The Redskins, and I mean, those were things that were kind of. I guess I'm like your father. Those were things that were kind of commonplace back in those days, and we kind of handled those things a little bit differently. Uh, some in silence, some in protest, but you know, uh, different times, much different owners. I mean,
Yes.
I can remember Bear Bryant saying he'd never have a black athlete on his football team. Uh, so,
Yes. Well, all it took was him realizing he needed them for him to change his mind.
that's all it ever takes. It's all about a dollar bill, y'all. You know, having a winning season. Uh, so let's get into baseball a little bit here because I'm sure you remember the Crime Dog. And the Crime Dog and Scott Rowland
Yep.
were officially inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Uh, Crime Dog was the first player to hit 30 or more home runs for 5 franchises.
Right.
And Rowland, he was elected to the on his fifth try. What are your thoughts on these two players?
These are both players that everyone thought would eventually get in. Scott Rowland's really been helped by advanced. I mean, it's a darn shame that our friend isn't here so he could rail against analytics, but that really helps Scott Rowland. Advanced metrics, analytics, WAR, and defensive range metrics and things like that really helped him because they're similar players with numbers almost exactly identical or sometimes even slightly superior that haven't gotten in and may not even get in. But he is one of the darlings of the analytics, generation, and I am. Uh, I'm fine with him getting in. I can think of players that I think are as deserving or maybe more deserving, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to those players. I mean, Gary Sheffield is superior to him by numbers, and of course, Sheffield is one of those guys that the Balco scandal or whatever things sort of hang around his name, and obviously Barry Bonds, even before he started taking performance-enhancing drugs. If once again, as he keeps pointing out, no one ever had a bad test on him. Now there are people who said things, and Victor Conti and whatever, but he never had a bad test. He never tested positive in his playing career. Obviously, Roger Clemens comes every up this time of year every year. But I'm going to go past all of them and talk about Shoeless Joe Jackson. Shoeless Joe Jackson was one of the greatest players of all time, and unfortunately got caught up in the Black Sox scandal. But it seems like, and once again, I'm not trying to impugn this young man's understanding of things, but he reportedly had an IQ somewhere in the mid 80s, which is, low normal, very low normal, but had almost no formal education. And if you look at his actual statistics from the actual games played in that World Series, if you were throwing it, he was doing it very badly because he was knocking the cover off the ball. So it's a very interesting case. And I don't know if there's a statute of limitations on, what he did or if he's just going to be punished forever. But to me, even more than, the players that have been sort of colored by, the Manny Ramirez's, the Rafael Palmeiros, he's talked about the others. Some of them we have actual bad tests on, like Sosa and Rafael Palmeiro and Manny Ramirez have bad tests. And then, David Ortiz is another interesting case because that's another guy who, seems like all is forgiven with David Ortiz for whatever reason. That's a guy that did have a bad test. So I'm a little confused about what the prevailing wisdom is on whether or not using a PED is a definite forever, never get in, no or not. But there are some players that it's clear, and being likable matters. David Ortiz was intensely likable, and guys like Albert / Joey Bell, guys like, Barry Bonds are intensely dislikable, so that's probably part of it. People don't like. I'm gonna mention one other guy, and this is probably two. I'm gonna mention two other guys, and this is probably a little bit of my homer showing a little bit, but Donnie Baseball, Don Mattingly, was on his way to being probably a first ballot Hall of Famer, and about 7 years, I think, into his career, sustained a back injury, and was still a good player after that, but was not the same player, particularly in terms of power. He went from being a guy that was consistently at 20, 25, even sometimes around flirted with 30, low 30s. I think he might have hit 31 or 32 one year. Home run guy to a guy that was a line drive hitter, a singles doubles hitter because of his back injury. Steve Garvey is an interesting case. Now, I'm not a live or die guy on Steve Garvey. If he gets in, I'll be fine with it. If he never gets in, I'll be fine with it. But a lot of people talk about him. Keith Hernandez was a guy that was basically I won't say a poor man's Don Mattingly because that's not quite fair. He didn't have quite the power that Mattingly had before the back injury. But Don Mattingly has 2,100 plus career hits, had a 307 lifetime batting average, had a batting title, 3 Silver Sluggers Award, and 9 Gold Gloves. One of the great all-around first basemen in terms of being able to field his position and hit. So that's the one I'm sort of wondering about and sort of trying to figure out what it is that's keeping him out. We talked about Shoeless Joe. I mean, 356 lifetime batting average. Hit 408 once. Dick Allen. Dick Allen's come very close sometimes. He's not a slam dunk, but 292 batting average, 351 home runs when it was harder to hit home runs, right? He played through what people call the golden age of pitching, right? I mean, that era from say about 63, through about 71. I mean, that was a different time. I mean, Steve Carlton, Sandy Koufax, Mickey Lolich. Tom Seaver in his prime, young Nolan Ryan. He faced a murderer's row of great young pitchers. The pitcher's mound was higher, right? In those days, they lowered it after the truly dominant year in 1968. But it was harder to be a hitter, much harder than it is now. At some point, I think Alex Rodriguez is the guy that breaks through for the tainted guys. We'll see if and when he gets in, and then tainted in the other direction, more like Shoeless Joe, of course, Pete Rose. 4,256. It's one of those numbers I memorized at some point when I was probably 12, 13 years old. No, he played after that. I was probably in my late teens, but I memorized that. The 303. I mean, he broke Ty Cobb's hit record. 17-time All-Star. 17-time All-Star.
Well, let's talk about some hitters. I got a couple questions I want to get through before Jeffrey gets here. But the Marlins second baseman, Luis Arraez, is closing it out the first half of the season, batting 383. Do you think he'll make history by becoming the first hitter since Ted Williams in 1941 to go a full season hitting 400?
I mean, the short answer is no. Several things work against that. One is the way most hitters approach hitting. Good, bad, or indifferent. Most guys don't choke up with 2 strikes anymore, whether you like it or not, or whether that matters to you or not. The last person I really thought had a legitimate chance was Tony Gwynn. Ichiro and Tony Gwynn. I guess I throw an Ichiro in there, but Ichiro and Tony Gwynn, the last 2 players I thought had a legitimate chance. They were historically great hitters, and they were guys that really prized bat control over bat speed. And that's sort of a dead thing, my friend. Fortunately or unfortunately, depends how you feel about it. Exit velo and all this stuff has made it so that players care so much about trying to get maximum lift, maximum power on every swing. And what that means is you're going to hit a fair amount of pop-ups because you got that little uppercut lift. That'll also get home runs too. But if players were swinging flat and level or even slightly downward, as a lot of those guys with super high averages did in the old days, I say the old days, I mean, Tony Gwynn and Ichiro weren't that long ago, especially Ichiro. But almost everyone has at least a slight uppercut to their swing nowadays. Almost everyone's swinging as hard as possible. It's just too hard to do it. I'll be impressed if he even gets to where George Brett did. I think Brett ended up at 388 one year. I'll be impressed if he's managed to get to that. It's so hard because pitchers, first of all, pitching is really good, and you face more different pitchers per game than ever before because, there's so many pitching changes. But the big thing is how batters approach hitting even with 2 strikes. In the old days, even if you're a power hitter, if you're Joe DiMaggio, if you're Mickey Mantle with 2 strikes, you would choke up a little bit. That's dead. That's gone. Even punch and Judy hitters, even singles and doubles hitters are swinging as hard as possible with 2 strikes, man. I just don't see a way it happens.
Well, hey, it should be interesting. Well, I'm sure we'll have this conversation at the end of the season.
Yes.
If he makes it or if he comes close. So
Right.
Either way. Little NBA. And I'm going to keep this kind of down to one team because Jaylen Brown just signed a 5-year, $304 million guaranteed Supermax extension.
Yep.
As you know, unlike football, basketball salaries are guaranteed.
That is
So,
real money. He's getting that money for real. Yes.
so as of now, he is the richest. He has the richest deal in the NBA. But are the Celtics getting closer to winning a championship?
No. I think that what they have done is they have set a precedent. They've said to their players, we are going to try to keep this thing together. When you pay Jaylen Brown that kind of money, who is your second option, a really good second option, probably one of the top 3 number 2s in all of basketball, right? I mean, if Anthony Davis is a number 2, then he's probably right there with him. And maybe Murray out in Denver is probably in that same sort of category. It's one of the top number 2s. But this is definitely telling you that they're not afraid to spend it, man. They're not afraid to spend money. I mean, imagine what people like Dr. J and Michael Jordan and, the late, Bill Russell, I guess, is looking down on this. But look, all the great players, all the great players, the top 10, 15 players of all time are thinking, no offense to Jaylen Brown, but he's not going to be one of the top 10 or 15 players of all time. And it's probably maybe in the top 10 or 15 in the league right now is getting that, right? So you wonder what will the next when contracts start coming up for guys like Jokic. Right, and what's that going to cost you? I picked the wrong time to be born, short. This is not that was not the move. I should have been a foot and a half taller, James. Yeah, wow, that's a significant amount of money.
Speaking of that, and as you said, Jaylen Brown is not even the number 1 guy on his team.
He is not. He's a number 2.
And I'm still kind of puzzled about the Marcus Smart move. I think there may have been some things that we don't hear about. But right now, Jason Tatum is making half of what Jaylen Brown has just signed for.
Correct.
Do you think that Tatum will become the Celtics' first $500 million contract?
I mean, unless they let him go to another team, how would you avoid it? Now, if we're still in the sports crib 10 years from now, we'll be looking back on $500 million contracts and being like, wow, remember the good old days when guys only made $500 million?
You remember when a $13 million contract was outrageous?
I remember when people lost their minds. Remember when Antoine Walker got his deal and people thought like that's the end of the NBA? This is unsustainable. It's too much money. What are we gonna do? Hide the women and children. So, as I said, we will look back on this contract that Jaylen Brown got and think about what a bargain it once was. Because the world is going to change and change dramatically. And he's helped to kick it off. I mean, it already was happening, but when you are the second best player on your team and you can demand that, yeah, that tells you that the world has changed.
Yeah, I mean, the money that these owners make has to be, is it baseball? I mean, basketball where they don't have to disclose? Or is that baseball?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Is it basketball or baseball where the owners don't have to disclose?
I mean, you have to disclose. The terms of the contract are disclosed. You can.
No, I mean how much money the owners make.
Oh, how much money the owner? I don't think there's any other than to the league itself. They're not required to disclose in any of the leagues, but you have to, when you're proposing to become an owner, you have to. That's the only time you have to share your financials is when you're coming in. Once you're in, yeah, you can close the books on your financials. The only thing you're required to disclose. Oh, this is that's what. Oh, Dan Snyder. That's where Dan Snyder got in trouble.
Yeah.
Aha. Right. All right. Speaking of disclosure, there's the revenue sharing, right? So if you don't do that right, if you aren't disclosing the proper numbers in terms of the amount of revenue you're supposed to share, and that's essentially what I think really led to the final downfall of Dan Snyder, right? Was he was playing funny with the money, along with all the other stuff. But yeah, that you do have to disclose. You do have to disclose the revenue that is to be shared amongst the all owners, because you're sharing it. And if you once again play funny with the money and they find out, they'll be held to pay.
Okay. Um, on another note, and I know we were all kind of surprised when Bronny had a cardiac incident yesterday, I believe it was, at the
Yes.
USC facilities. A couple of questions, and we've all kind of talked about this. Uh, but on a serious note, what if Bronny can't play basketball? Not not because he can't play basketball, but because of health concerns.
Right. Well, I mean, we've seen
Uh,
this unfortunately,
well,
happen.
well, there's two things here because
Oh, okay.
we know that LeBron's wish is to play with his son. So if his son is deemed unhealthy to play, do you think that it would hasten LeBron's retirement? And number two, do you think that, I mean, how do you feel? I mean, these are most cardiac instances, you do not have a warning. So, how do you feel when an owner, when a kid that's because you're doing basketball here. This is not football where if you're on defense, you got time. You're constantly cardio. What do you think of this situation? Regardless I mean, it, even if it came down to one of those instances where I want to play, but what do you think?
Right. Well, you and I both remember, Hank Gathers, and there have been incidents, unfortunately, where people have. There was a young man. Oh gosh, very very tall. What was his name? I remember Flo Hyman, who was a 6'5" uh, basketball player, and she was a center and a very highly regarded one. She died of a sudden cardiac arrest. Um, and people are going to speculate about all kinds of things. First of all, I don't know if it necessarily hastens his retirement. I think that two things will play into it. One is, as you said, what exactly the future holds for Bronny, but also I like to remind people that he has another son, and the other son is actually the more highly regarded player. I
But
don't know if
he's
Bronny.
16 now.
Right. I
He's
don't know.
16.
Right.
Unless it's an over 40 league, you know, I mean, you know, you're talking about at least what another
3 years.
yeah, three to five.
Right. Well, yeah, at least three. Um, so I'm not sure if Bronny was an NBA player anyway. Quite frankly, I don't know how much you've watched him. I think Bronny is a
Well,
good player.
that was my other question. If you remember, I've always asked, what if Bronny doesn't make it to the pros? But
Right. So I'm hoping that he makes a full and complete recovery, first of all, and he's been in my prayers. But even 100% sound physically, I don't think he was necessarily an NBA player, first of all. I think Bronny's younger brother is an NBA player. So that's the first thing. So if he was truly intent on playing with one of his sons, he'd probably have to wait a little while longer anyway. I think Bronny would have been a guy that would have had a nice little college career, but just wouldn't have projected to the pros. Part two, or the second part of this, you asked also. if
But
Bronny.
about the effect on LeBron, whether or not he would retire earlier. Do you think that uh, since Bronny, like you said, Bronny has been the one that has been touted because he's the oldest, but
Yeah, I don't. I think LeBron will make his decision. He expressed the desire to play with his son, but I think his decision will be made based on his own health, his own effectiveness, and the fortunes of the team he's on. If the team doesn't look like it's a contender anymore, and he doesn't feel like going through a rebuild or trying to, you know, engineer yet another trade, then I think that would probably be the factors that led to him retiring. I think that whatever does or doesn't happen with his sons would be a tertiary concern at most.
okay. I see we have Mr. Fan down here in the queue. It's been a while since we had Jeffrey on the show. Jeffrey, how are you doing this evening?
Hi, how are you all doing tonight? Hey, James, Bill.
Hello, always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you again for being so generous with your time, Jeffrey. I love having you on my show. I love having you on James's show. I love having you on, period.
I appreciate it. I enjoy talking with you all too.
Oh man, so few things to talk about on the college football scene, Jeffrey. Before we get to the ACC exclusively, I was coming across a few articles here, and the first one that I thought was rather ironic, I guess is the word to use here, was Lane Kiffin talking about the NCAA transfer portal and the NIA rules. Uh, and he says that they're not in the best interest of college football. Jeffrey, what do you think? Considering at one time, didn't Texas A&M weren't they considered the number one recruiter out of the portal and all of that?
Yeah, I think a couple of years ago, Texas A&M had that number one ranked recruiting class. But yeah, I read some of the comments from Lane Kiffin, and I think he's probably frustrated, like many coaches, is that no matter what he does in this landscape, there's going to be programs that can do it better with more money than he can. So I think what that creates is that he's trying to equal the playing field. So I think he's not sorry if he can get players in, a lesser program from the Sun Belt or something like that can't. Um, he's frustrated that he might not be able to get a player that Alabama or Georgia is getting, and those schools. But I think he's right in the sense that, I mean, it's totally out of control right now, and I think you won't find many coaches who'll come out and say, "Hey, I'm happy with the way the things are, and I don't see any reason to change it." I think, from the lowest level of football to, the top of the college football food chain, I think they all recognize that it can't remain like this.
Bill, what are your thoughts on Lane Kiffin and uh, his remarks on the transfer portal and
Yeah,
NIL?
I don't disagree with Jeffrey, but it is a very strange messenger for
Yeah,
this
yeah,
particular
that's true. I agree
message.
with that.
I mean, I've seen Lane Kiffin do photo shoots with recruits where he's like, I don't know whose car it is, but like a Maserati or something. They're like leaning against. Um, I mean, he's done like rap video shoots. Like it's so funny coming from him of all people. Um, if you literally were allowed to just have bags of cash in your hands when you showed up to recruiting visits, if you were allowed to, Lane would do it. So it's very interesting to hear him decry the current state of affairs. But it doesn't diminish that the fact he's saying some things that are true. It's just you just can't help but kind of shake your head when it's coming from Lane Kiffin. Uh, and his big sort of advantage he used to have was he was like a really social media savvy younger coach, and that was his thing. And before these other things sort of pushed it back in other people's favor, he was enjoying, in fact, some nice advantages because he was better at Twitter, he was better at Instagram than a lot of the older coaches in the SEC, and even some of the ones his age were not as good at it. He's a naturally self-promotion kind of genius, and he's literally been around coaching his entire life. He knows a lot about how to get good players and how to get teams to even perform above maybe what they should be able to do just based on pure talent. But yes, to hear him be the one that is talking about, oh, woe is me, players have no loyalty and there's too much money in the system and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I mean, I want to agree with him. It's just Lane Kiffin.
That's a good point. It might carry more weight, if those comments came from someone like Nick Saban, who has every advantage in the world complaining about the system, kind of like, before when Mike Krzyzewski would speak on the state of college basketball. So yeah, I agree with Bill there. I kind of agree with what he's saying, but him saying it won't carry as much weight as some others.
Without getting into their politics, because I do a Monday show on politics, but without getting into their politics, what did you think about the NIL? And we kind of talked about this last week, Jeffrey, about one of the coaches saying that only Congress can fix this NIL situation. And then you have a bill that is proposed by Senator Tuberville and Senator Joe Manchin. As I said, leaving the politics aside, what did you think about the bill itself, Bill?
Well, I'll be perfectly honest. I know that the bill came out, but I didn't read the details of the bill, and here's the reason why. I I don't think this is something for Congress to be working on. I know that they're just looking for help from anywhere, and that was the reason I didn't read the bill, because I think in the end it's not gonna. Maybe I should have, but I just don't think that Congress is going to be the answer. I think what's going to happen is it should have been the NCAA. We've talked about this, I think, before. 5 years ago, they could have got ahead of this and prepared for the inevitable, but they didn't, and now they're pretty much irrelevant to rules and regulations in college athletics. And I think what you'll eventually see is the conferences take this over for themselves, and whether they work together or not, remains to be seen. I think that they will, because they want to have a public face of, hey, we're working on this together. But I I don't think Congress is going to I don't think Congress is going to be the one to end up regulating this. I know they put that bill out there, and that's why I saw it, and I probably should have read it, but I didn't go that deeply into it, because I was like, this is going to stop short here, and the conferences are going to have to be the ones to take control here. And with what Lane Kiffin said, might have been the wrong messenger, but like I said, I think he's thinking what a lot of coaches are thinking, that it is out of control. And so eventually I think you'll see the conference commissioners start to put something together on their own.
Bill?
Yeah, so pass, right? How clever. Protection of athletes and sports, was it protection of athletes and sports something, whatever the other S is for, is I understand what's motivating it. I'm going to say, I'm going to agree with Jeffrey. I think the conferences. I would essentially, if I were the conferences, I would say the collectives that are paying into this, I would basically mandate revenue sharing, where across the conference it's standardized and there's slots for if you're a 5-star playing this position, you can get up to X amount, and then that comes from the collective. You can also work individual deals up to a certain amount, and then there'd be a cap of what you can receive while you're playing. The rest will be held in an escrow account, earning interest till you're done to fund your whatever life, your rehabilitation if you've suffered injury, whatever it is. I would also mandate that there would be follow-along care. Speaking of healthcare, for I don't know, a dozen years. I have to think about the number of years, but after you used up the last year of eligibility, I would have a certain amount of it go back into scholarship funds, so that for non-revenue producing sports, right? Because there's so much money being driven into the sports that had money, right? Ironically, all the money is being, but not ironically, I mean, it makes sense. All the money is going into places where the money already is. You don't see people, generating a huge amount of capital to fund the fencing program, lacrosse programs. There's a little bit of money in lacrosse, but, and this is once again, I'm being biased here, but wrestling, men's and women's, is hanging on by a toenail. Most places where they have wrestling programs, with a handful of exceptions. I would love to see conferences established that no caps on how much can come in, no caps even on directly how much a player can eventually generate, but of the amount that's raised annually, it's portioned out so that X amount comes to you now, X amount is held in escrow for the future, X amount goes towards scholarship for non-revenues in sports, and X amount goes towards, helping to fund your long-term care and things like that. I'd love to see something coming from the conferences like that. I would like to see some things to sort of establish that without squashing the ability of these young, business people, because that's what you're allowing them to do, to be a business. We should be applauding the fact that student athletes are now seeing the real world, right? Are now seeing how to commoditize, how to brand. These are good things. I don't want that taken away or squashed. I would like to see the money distributed more evenly and a certain amount of it held, just so that, like when you go to Las Vegas, you give your friend a certain amount of money and say, hide this from me. So I can't blow it. It's sort of like that, because if you're a 19-year-old and you're Jalen Rashida and you've got $1 million, I know he has people around him, but things happen. You see a car you really like and it costs $400,000. You probably shouldn't spend $400,000 on a car, but you can, right? Because you've got it. So I would like to make sure that, just so we could avoid somebody all of a sudden having hundreds of thousands or $1 million available to them and all of a sudden blows through it very quickly.
Okay. All right.
Bill gets my vote.
Yeah. According to Yahoo College football writer Sam Cooper, these are the first-year coaches with the most approved in 2023. And I'm going to start with you, Bill. You can agree or disagree with this list, or you can make any additions or subtractions that you like.
Okay.
Number one is Coach Prime at Colorado.
Well, yeah, I guess he's number one on everybody's list, but sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Number two is Hugh Freeze of Auburn. Number three is Matt Rule of Nebraska. Number four, Scott Sutherland of Cincinnati. Number five,
is that Satterfield?
Yes.
Okay.
Lou Fickle, Wisconsin. Trent Dilfer, UAB. Zach Arnett, Mississippi State. Tom Herman, Florida Atlantic. Kenny Dillingham, Arizona State. or Jeff Brom, Louisville?
That's an interesting list. Well, I mean, Dion wins just because he's doing it so differently from anybody ever in the history of the sport. So, for those who don't already know, speaking of the transfer portal, um, there are only 5 members of the two deep from 1 year ago who are on the two deep now. 39 out of those 44 selections, 44 spots on the two deep at Colorado are new players from new programs. Either high school players, but most of them are not high school players. The vast majority are players that played college football somewhere else. So he's a little bit of a hot seat because of who he is, his name, his swagger, or whatever term you want to use, but mostly because of how dramatically they've reshaped that roster in such a short amount of time. So yeah, the number one has to be Deion Sanders. I can't imagine anybody would disagree with that, quite frankly.
Any other subtractions, additions?
I mean, there's other coaches you could throw on there. I mean, I'm not so sure I would say that there's so much to prove for Coach Tom Herman. Uh, he's going to be given time. It's a low pressure, not just a low pressure, but it's not like being at Texas. Nothing's like being at Texas. But I mean, it's some of these programs are going to be very, very patient. I think Trent Dilfer's going to be given a long leash at UAB. It's not like they're going to expect him to get to double-digit wins right away. So some of these some of these coaches are not really on the hot seat to me. But I mean, Coach Rules will be given time. Nebraska was such a mess when he came in that I think they're going to give him I think by year 3 they're expected to see some real progress. But I think he gets basically 2 years almost for free. Similar to Prime internally, but the nation will turn its eyes towards him so much because of his name and, like I said, things before about the way he's building the program. Brom returns to Louisville, right where he was once a player, and I think he was an offensive coordinator there too, if memory serves it correctly. He's a beloved figure there. I mean, obviously they want to win, but I think he'll be given basically almost like a pass for 2 years. So I don't think that's a very hot seat for him. Hugh Freeze. Well, he wins. The problem with him isn't winning. The problem with him is, despite all of his activities with Fellowship of Christian Athletes and talking about Jesus constantly, he's been involved with some pretty scandalous activities. So the problem isn't if he wins games. The problem is if those games don't get redacted or rescinded or whatever later, vacated, or any of those terms later. But Hugh Freeze is going to win. I promise you that. Just will they stay on the books? I'm trying to remember who else, some of the coaches you mentioned.
Uh, well, Jeffrey, what's your thoughts on that list?
Yeah, I think the list itself is pretty good, and the one thing that kind of stands out to me is when you look at the list, you see 3 or 4 coaches that were considered the next big thing, trying to get a reset at their new job. I definitely agree with Bill. I think Deion Sanders at Colorado. It makes a lot of sense that he's number one on the list just because he's turned over that roster in such a way. Um, it's he's playing by the rules that they allow now. With the portal. And what he's done, is it going to be something that other coaches are going to do to the extent that he did? And he's such a polarizing figure that if he succeeds at Colorado, in the next 2 years, I mean, he could be looking at some of the biggest jobs in college football, I think, over the next 2 or 3 years. So, I mean, I think he's definitely one everyone's keeping an eye on. But when you look at some of these other coaches, you know, Hugh Freeze, Matt Rule, Scott Satterfield, Luke Fickle, Tom Herman, when he was at Texas, even Jeff Brom a little bit, when he was at Purdue. I mean, these guys were all, a lot of them were looked at like, hey, this is going to be the next big coach, and they had varying levels of success. We know what happened with with Hugh Freeze, but then he had a lot of success at Liberty. I mean, the guy can win, and Auburn is a place we know that you can win huge there. Um, so in terms of his coaching ability, I don't think it's as much matter for him. Does he need to prove he can coach? We know he can coach. It's going to be a matter if he can put some of the distractions that he's dealt with over his career behind him, and turn Auburn into the kind of program that a lot of us expect. And the same with Matt Rule. He turned that Temple team around so quickly. Then he's coaching the Carolina Panthers, and it kind of more or less flamed out there. And now he's at a school that's looking for a reset as much as he is with his coaching career is with their program. I mean, we know that Nebraska. I have kind of a rule. If you haven't won a national championship in 25 years, I can't call you a blue blood anymore. And I'm thinking, when was Nebraska? They're right on the edge to me of losing their blue blood status when that last national title Osborne won. Was it 97, or I think the last one they won, and we hadn't heard from Nebraska since they joined the Big Ten. Um, but we know that the fan support that they have there, and if you can manage to get some recruiting up there and build up from within, I mean, the program can still be big time there at Nebraska. So I do think Matt Rule. I think him at number 3 makes a lot of sense. Um, Scott Satterfield, I mean, he left Louisville in a really weird situation. He was flirting with South Carolina while he was here. He had some successes, but he also had some huge disappointments, and he's getting a fresh start at Cincinnati. And even of us in the ACC thought when he came from App State, that he was going to really be able to turn Louisville into a power. I think every one of us kind of said, "Hey, this is going to be a great hire," and it was a kind of uneven at best. And then when he was flirting with South Carolina, that really soured Louisville fans on him. He fell behind Kentucky in the state. So I think he also makes a lot of sense at that number 4 position, and especially Tom Herman. He's when he was at Texas, they were thinking national championships there, and Florida Atlantic has given him an opportunity. He's still young enough that if he wins big at Florida Atlantic, he'll get another opportunity to coach at the highest level. But I do think he's a coach with a lot to prove. They put Jeff Brom on here. I'm not sure if I would put him that much with that much to prove, especially in year 1 at Louisville, because he's going to get plenty of time there. I mean, he's a former player. I mean, he was the guy that Louisville's really wanted uh, for the since Bobby Petrino left, and they were happy to get Satterfield. But even at that time, they were looking at Brom eventually, and he did a lot of good things at Purdue. Went to the Big Ten championship game. I mean, I think he took Purdue pretty close as far as he could take them. So I'm not really sure if Brom is someone that has to prove himself in year 1 at Louisville. As long as they don't, as long as the wheels don't fall off, and I don't think they will. I know he doesn't have Malik Cunningham, but he's getting a quarterback that he played with from Cal. Name escapes me at the moment, but I think Louisville is going to be pretty decent. And I don't think he really has as much proof as what's suggested here, but for sure through the first 4, Dion, Hugh Freeze, Matt Rule, and Scott Satterfield. I definitely agree with that.
Okay. Uh, Jeffrey, also according to the same writer, here are the 10 college teams that could take a step back in 2023. See if you agree with this list. Number 1, Cincinnati. They were 9-4 last year. Coastal Carolina, they were also 9-4. Duke, 9-4. Fresno State, 10-4. Mississippi State, 9-4. Oregon State, 10-3. Purdue, 8-6. South Carolina 8-5. TCU 13-2. Tennessee 11-2. Jeffrey, and do you agree and disagree? Any additions, subtractions?
Uh, I'll hit a couple of the ones that caught my eye. We talked about Scott Satterfield and how he had that uneven tenure at Louisville. Um, Cincinnati's moving to the Big 12. I mean, they're definitely going to get a step up in competition, especially, Texas still being there in the Big 12. TCU, they're on the list too. They're not going to drop off the face either. And we know there's some good football programs in the Big 12. So I do think, a bowl season for Cincinnati would be the goal. I don't expect them to go 9-4 again. They got to play Pittsburgh in the opening game, so um, they're going to be playing a lot tougher schedule than they're used to dealing with. Duke, uh, Duke is an interesting one because I don't think that they're going to drop off as a team. I think they very capably, very possibly be as good as they were last year. Riley Leonard there at quarterback. Elko did such a fantastic job in his first year. The problem with Duke is not that they won't be a quality team, but the schedule is 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 a much tougher this season. They opened the season with Clemson. I'm trying to think. They got. Let me check real quick. I think they're playing Florida State later in the year. Pull up that schedule. I just remember looking at it and thinking like, oh, they're playing a much more difficult schedule than they did. Oh yeah, they've got Notre Dame. They've got to play Florida State. They've got to go to North Carolina. They got Pittsburgh. So you've got three games right off of the bat against teams that'll be in the top 15: Clemson, Notre Dame, and Florida State. Um, and you're likely looking at three losses there. So I mean, they would have to go, 9-1 with the rest of their schedule to keep that record together. So I think you could see Duke go 6-6 or 7-5, and they would have been just as good as last year. But the schedule is what's going to pull them down. It's just tougher than what it was last year. Um, Mississippi State, you know, playing in the SEC. They went 9-4 last year, but having a transition to a new coach after the untimely passing of Mike Leach, that's going to be tough to win nine games again. Oregon State, it was kind of a magical year, I think, for them to go 10-3. Uh, the former Clemson quarterback DJ Uyunglele is there. Uh, I had to say I don't trust DJ as my starting quarterback would be a big part of that. We'll see that if a change of scenery, allows him to live up to some of his high school potential. Um, but the Pac-12 is a strong conference this year. I mean, they've some have called it the conference with the best quarterbacks in the country. Which what they have going on there at Utah and USC, Chip Kelly at UCLA. Oregon's going to be good. So it's kind of hard to see Oregon State maintaining a 10-win season. Purdue 8-6. That's not out of the question that they stay in that range. And South Carolina 8-5. If they lose to North Carolina in week one, I might say like, oh, they could be in some trouble. But them winning 7, 8 games doesn't seem out of the question. But you look at the last two, TCU, 13-2, playing in the national championship game. Um, it almost seems inevitable that there's only one way to go is down for TCU. I mean, they could still put a pretty quality team together, and I don't think they're going to be able to repeat, the magical season that they had last year, and kind of the same with Tennessee. I mean, they got the magical win over Alabama. Um, and then this year they got to go on the road to Alabama. They host Georgia. I know Joe Milton. be the quarterback there, and they got a lot of high expectations from him. But I mean, that's some big shoes to fill, replacing Hendon Hooker. So it might be a stretch to see Tennessee, be on the fringes of the playoffs like they were last year. I mean, I think they'll still be a quality team, a top 20 team, maybe even top 15. But to see them be basically within one game of possibly making the playoffs, uh, I'd be a little bit surprised if Tennessee maintains that. Just you look at TCU and Tennessee; they just had such great seasons last year. It does seem inevitable that they drop back a little bit.
Yeah. When I hear someone say we're gonna take care of losing Hendon Hooker by plugging in Joe Milton, in my head I hear the theme music from Curb Your Enthusiasm. Da, 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 da. Joe Milton has some talent, but it's inconceivable to me that you think there wouldn't be a drop off there.
Right.
I mean, I think anyone who's and once again, I'm not anti Joe Milton. He's had his moments, but I mean, he's had his moments in every way you can mean he's had his moments, and I just feel like Tennessee. Yeah, you're right. I mean, most of the teams you just mentioned are going to be struggling to stay within 2 wins of what they did the year previous. I'll be excited to see how some of these teams just look, right? When you have that, as you said, magical run, a lot of things go right. Tennessee, had their magical run sort of interrupted by the injury to Hendon Hooker, unfortunately. And even before that, they had Cedric Tillman go down. So the only thing I will say in their sort of defense is they had 2 important players miss significant time, and they still managed to have the year they had. However, I don't know if a healthy Joe Milton still is balm for your wounds after losing Hendon Hooker. But I'm interested to see a lot of those teams that were mentioned, this year. I'm intrigued by what Illinois looks like this year. They lost a lot of talent to the draft. And that was all talent, of course, that was brought there by their previous coach. That wasn't, talent that Brett Bielema brought in, though he's done fairly well as a recruiter. All those guys, the Brown brothers and Witherspoon and the offensive lineman whose name is escaping me. Can't remember his name. But all of those players that went in this draft, including, one player that went in the top 10 and some really solid players that went later, Illinois is not Alabama. It's not LSU. It's not USC. It's not a place where you just, quote unquote, reload. So I'm interested to see what Illinois looks like this year. I do believe, I can't believe I'm saying this, I do believe Brett Bielema will do a good job there. I was very critical of him at Wisconsin, but I think maybe he's learned some things. Let's see. Yeah, Duke, you mentioned Duke. Duke's an interesting situation just because, once again, it's not an easy place to recruit. Even with the transfer portal, you have a lot of players who just can't. I mean, it's an academic commitment. You're not just going there to, quote unquote, play football. You are going there to play school, right? You don't go to Duke if you don't want to play school. Riley Leonard is an intriguing guy. He's a lot like Daniel Jones, but perhaps even more athletic, which is sort of a wow. I mean, because Daniel Jones is a really good athlete, but Leonard might be even more athletic. But they've lost some players, and I don't think they'll be able to replace. And also, the main thing you said, Jeffrey, right? I double agree on the. There's at least 3 more losses probably on that L side of the ledger this year over last. I wonder if USC, they weren't mentioned, but I wonder if USC, everyone's sort of penciling in USC to be a 10, 11, 12 win team. I'm not so sure. I think they'll still be good, but if they win 9 games, I won't be shocked. If they're a 9-win team, I won't be shocked. I think that they have some question marks. To me, especially on defense, they have some question marks. I'll be interested to see what their run game looks like, their non-quarterback running game looks like. Because when USC's at its best, they have a stout defense and they run the football well, no matter what the quarterback does. And at times, the last few years, they've struggled on defense, and their running game has been unspectacular. I mean, this used to be TBU. I mean, James and I at least both remember when whoever the starting tailback was at USC was automatically a person who was likely to be a Heisman Trophy finalist, or at least consideration for. I mean, the list is ridiculous. John Arnett, Mike Garrett, Frank Gifford. Frank Gifford wasn't a Heisman Trophy finalist, but he certainly could have been. Ricky Bell and Marcus Allen and Charles White, and I guess Reggie Bush has been redacted or whatever, but it doesn't change what he did. Just this ludicrous list of Anthony Davis of top flight running backs, and they still recruit reasonably well at that position, but they aren't getting the same kind of production. They aren't getting guys who are threatening to go for 1,800, 1,600, 2,000 yards, even with the extra game. I mean, Marcus Allen went for 2,003 yards in an 11-game season. Let that marinate. So I'm interested to see what those teams also do this year versus what they did last year.
Okay. Jeffrey, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips said that the conference is strong, and he downplayed some of the strife within the conference. Jeffrey, why don't you tell us what's happening within the conference and give us a little preview of this upcoming season? Are you guys doing preseason drills and two-a-days yet?
Yeah, you're starting to see some of those practices starting to ramp up around the corner here and there. Right now, not quite this week so much though, because we're in the middle of ACC media days. That was going on, trumped a little bit today by the news about Colorado possibly moving to the Big 12, but that could be a topic for another week. But as it pertains to the ACC, it always comes down to revenue generation. What Jim Phillips has to do, that's like his first, second, third, fourth, and fifth priority to deal with, and until he comes out with a definitive statement that, hey, this is what ESPN and the ACC are going to do at this time, there's always going to be speculation of what's the plan, what's he going to do. But I think some of the things he hinted at were more of an indication than other times he spoke that something is going on in the background. I mean, he mentioned a few things that, hey, we've had more conversations, fruitful conversations in the last 6 months. Or he said in the last year, but then he said especially in the last 6 months. He kept alluding to the great relationship they have. So I think it would be naive to say nothing is going on. But they're definitely looking at options. But until he actually says what they are, there's always going to be speculation about that revenue gap. He does have one thing I definitely think he has. He has the gift of some time. Um, they're not in the position the Pac-12 was, where they were running up against a deadline to get things done, because there's always that ground of rights in the background, and I don't think you'll see anyone challenge that in the near future. It may not make it all the way to its end in 2036 before someone challenges, but he has 2 or 3 years to really formulate a plan of how to raise revenue in the ACC, and I think you will see something. How much it is always going to be the question. We'll just have to see on that. But for the ACC, they're going to be here this year, next year, and the year after. I'm looking at it as in terms of 5 years. We'll see what the state is in 5 years, but for the next 5, the ACC is gonna move forward. When you look towards this season, though, there's a lot of optimism. Building off the winning bowl season of last year, that the conference is starting to turn the corner a little bit on their football. And you look at Florida State and Clemson right now. You've got 2 teams that I don't know if you can pencil them in as like surefire playoff contenders, but they're in the conversation, and they're going to have the schedule and the opportunity. They got the team makeups that gives them a chance to be playoff teams. And you've needed a second team outside of Clemson the last 5 or 6 years to kind of create those huge marquee matchups in the ACC, and I think you'll have that with Florida State. Uh, I consider Florida State the favorite. um, they go to Clemson, but that with the way the conference is set up now, you're going to have the top two teams in the ACC championship. So Florida State loses at Clemson, they would still have a great opportunity to be in Charlotte. And what I think would happen, I'm predicting is that they'll lose at Clemson, but then beat Clemson in Charlotte. And one of the reasons I favor Florida State is at the quarterback position. I think Jordan Travis, uh, he's a Heisman. You hear him on Heisman lists, but I still think he's kind of an underrated quarterback nationally. He's such a great leader. I mean, he really elevated Florida State last year to have their best season since 2016. And that's where Clemson still has a bit of a question mark. We know how talented Cade Klubnik is, but he hasn't played a lot, and he's going to have a new under offensive system with Garrett Riley, and nobody really knows how Clemson's offense is going to look. They should be great on defense. They're really talented on defense, but how's that offense going to look? And I think Florida State's just a little bit more established on both sides of the ball with Travis, with Verse on the defensive side of the ball. Um, I think Clemson's going to be better on defense, but I think Florida State right now goes into the season with more balance, and they're my favorite. A couple of other teams I want to keep an eye on. Um, North Carolina, they come back with Drake May, but their defense struggled. They struggled towards the end of last year. They can get a win in that first game of the season against South Carolina. I mean, their season could really take off. I remember talking about this on Bill's show. NC State is a big wild card for me because I think they're going to be great on defense, but you've got Robert Anai reunited with Brennan Armstrong, and if they can put together even close to the numbers that they did 2 years ago at Virginia, then you've got to. And I don't think he quite has the skill position weapons that Virginia team did. But if he can put up at least somewhat similar numbers, NC State becomes a real wild card and can have a really nice season. So I look at North Carolina, NC State as wild cards. I think Miami is a potential wild card because they also have the same thing going on, trying to get their quarterback Van Dyke to play like he did 2 years ago. If they can get an early win over Texas A&M, their season could really take off. So, Florida State, Clemson, heads and shoulders above everyone else, I would say. Florida State, your favorite. Then teams like Miami, NC State, North Carolina, and let's not forget about Pittsburgh. I think Pat Narduzzi's got uh, Pittsburgh on really solid footing. They've been producing NFL talent. We've seen what Phil Jurkovec can do at quarterback when he has time. He didn't have any at Boston College. So with a better offensive line, they're a team that could be a wild card. Um, so I think you've got an ACC that has two top 10 caliber teams, and probably two or three others that could be top 25 caliber. So I think this could be one of the stronger ACC football seasons that we've seen in a while.
All right, well, hey Jeffrey, we thank you so much for visiting us and giving us your insights. We look forward to having you back in a couple weeks. Any final thoughts for our listeners tonight?
Yeah, I think we're just gonna have to check out tomorrow what's going on, if the Pac-12 is gonna be still alive after what's going on with Colorado. Are they? It sounds like they're leaving. Are they really leaving? That's been the big story here. Immediate. We'll see the media predictions for the ACC, and yeah, I'm tired of this realignment stuff for the summer. I'm ready to move on to the actual football games. But you can find me at Talking ACC Sports on Twitter and allsportsdiscussion.com, writing about and following the ACC. Appreciate it. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Thank you
Thank
so
you as
much.
always, Jeff.
Yeah,
Thank you. Bye.
the best. He is the best.
Yeah, Jeffrey was one of those uh, gems that you find, but you have to look, uh, you know, and you have to be kind of open to, you know, dealing with some, well, I mean, we cover just about everybody here from the Mountain West, ACC, SEC. So, but Jeffrey's always been a great expert on the ACC basketball and football. But Bill, let's jump off here into some NFL topics. And this time I'm going to use my man Craig Carlton, who's from the Carlton Report in the mornings now. Uh, Seems to have taken the place of Undisputed for the time being. Uh, Funny show, but Craig Carlton says that these are his top 5 candidates for the NFL coaches on the hot seat this season. Now, some of these uh, names might, I guess, tweak your interest a little bit, but I'm going to go down in his order. Number 5, uh, Chargers coach Brandon Staley. Number 4, Cowboys coach Mike McCarthy. Number 3, Bills coach Sean McDermott.
Huh.
Number 2, Jets coach Robert Saleh. And number 1, Patriots coach Bill Belichick. Do you agree with this top 5, or do you have a different top 5?
I'm a little surprised he's shown McDermott there. They've been within an eyelash of making it to the Super Bowl a couple of times. I mean, if they tail off, I could see. I still think it's another year away. So let's say they go. I don't see this happening. Let's say they underachieve and go 9-8, finish third in their division. Next year, he starts the year with, the hot seat. You mentioned Mike McCarthy. I agree with you. You mentioned, or agree with that. You mentioned one that wasn't up there, but I'm a little bit surprised wasn't up there, was Todd Bowles.
Well, I think everybody knows that Todd Bowles should be out by what?
Well, my point is that I'd have him pretty high up on a list of coaches in the hot seat. So you have who else was on the list on the hot seat?
I had Brandon Staley.
Staley, yeah, definitely on the hot seat. Yes.
Robert Saleh.
Oh yeah, solid, definitely good. It's a no excuses year for the Jets. Yep, go ahead.
Bill Belichick.
I'll need some more time, but I think Belichick has the job as long as he wants it. Quite frankly, I mean, I guess if they go like 0-11, they let him go before the season is out. But as long as they're still around 500 or above 500, I don't think he's going anywhere.
What about Mike McCarthy?
I think I said earlier, Mike McCarthy is definitely on the hot seat, and he's put himself on an even hotter seat by moving on from Kellen Moore and making himself the play caller, and it better work.
What you say, it better work. Let's see. In an 8-minute video for the quarterback series, quarterbacks Patrick Mahomes and Marcus Mariota named Kirk Cousins as the most underrated quarterback in the NFL. Kirk Cousins says it's Jimmy Porn. Who do you think is the most underrated quarterback in the NFL?
I mean, the most underrated quarterback in the NFL is probably still Geno Smith because people have dismissed what he did last year. But I mean, Cousins. I don't think he's underrated. I think people simply Uh, I think people simply sort of, frankly, disrespect him, which is slightly different. I think people generally assess his football playing and his physical talent roughly accurately. I think some people simply disrespect him, despite him being reasonably accomplished as an NFL quarterback, taking his team to a lot of wins, taking his team to the playoffs a few times. One, a couple even, but there's definitely a sense of something going bad and then everything going bad to some extent with him, where a bad situation always gets worse. But he's a talented guy. He understands where you want him to go with the ball. He can learn your offense. But I just feel like when you're looking at guys like Derek Carr, guys like, you know, um, Kirk Cousins, a handful of others that are very dependent upon situation and talent around them. And doesn't mean you're a bad quarterback. Most quarterbacks are dependent upon situation and the talent around you. There's a handful, and obviously a very successful handful, but a handful don't. Most players need the right coach. Most coaches need the right players.
I'm not really sure how they got Marcus Mariota tied up in this conversation. Uh,
I
uh,
mean, he's got something to prove, I guess, and that whether or not should stay in and around the league, but he's not being discussed feverishly now.
no, not at all. Let him cook. Steve Young says the 49ers to trust Brock Purdy's potential. Uh, has Trey Lance become the 49ers version of Jordan Love, Bill?
Yeah. So you're asking about the Green Bay Packers and the development of Jordan Love?
No, what I'm asking about is Trey Lance, and is he uh, the Jordan Love of the 49ers? I mean, he at one time we considered him the future. Now he's the third string.
I was about to say no, because Jordan Love is headed in the right direction, definitely. So he'll have to play some catch up to get where Jordan Love is in terms of how the franchise sees him in terms of future value. The good news, he's very young and he has lots of chances to still probably right this thing, but he's a very inexperienced player. And I'm not just talking about the NFL. I think he only had 13 college starts. And I think the most he ever had in 1 year was something like 11. And while, there's places where you can find, child actors, whatever, there's Trey Lance is extremely exciting, very talented, but he was in a very run-heavy offense in college, much like Carson Wentz was. He was on a team that had a decided talent advantage. I would say probably more than 80% of the time when they played a game, their team had decidedly more talent than the team they're playing against. And he just needs to learn. He's very raw. He needs to be in a low stakes environment where if he makes mistakes, and see that the NFL is not this, unfortunately, James, then people will be philosophical and understanding about it. He's in a situation where because of what Brock Purdy did, he needs to be darn near perfect, because every time he makes a mistake, people are, well, Purdy wouldn't have, so yeah, I sort of feel for the young man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see. Because according to everybody else, the 49ers is almost a plug and play as far as the quarterback position, because they have so much talent on the other side of the ball. Uh, what do you think about the holdout of Joey Bosa? Did that surprise you or not?
So
Talking about Bosa's holdout.
yeah, you said Bosa.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point he'll get his money. He'll come in. I don't. It's not 1974 anymore. I don't think any. We've seen. I think we've seen the last full season holdout for an NFL player. I think it was Le'Veon Bell. I think that ship has now sailed. I think worst case scenario, he misses preseason, maybe a game, two at the most. But they hammer out a deal. They sign him for 5 or 6 years to come.
Yeah, there is no way that the 49ers let Bosa go. So uh, I think that's a deal that they will hammer out. Um, the Bears. The Bears are the only team without a 4,000-yard passer since the 16-game season began in 1968. Bill Justin Fields says that he'll be the first Bear quarterback to throw for 4,000 yards this season. Bill, what do you think? Do you think there's a better chance for him to throw for 4,000 yards or for him to rush for 1,000?
I think he does neither, but I think rushing for 1,000 is the more likely. So let's break it down. If he manages to average about 220 yards passing per game, which is about what I'm projecting, and then rushes for about 44 or so yards per game, which is about what I'm projecting, he'll end up with about 3,460 something yards passing is what I'm projecting, and he'll probably rush for right around 1,000, maybe over 1,000. So let's say over. You'll give that family, or that household, if you were to look at what I'm talking about, you would sort of word based on that. So
Okay, so you think that
so I think 4,100 to 4,200 total yards is about what I'm seeing, but I don't think he passes for 4,000. Partially because I don't think they're going to throw the ball enough for him to get there. I think they want to really run the football.
okay. Let's talk about Saquon Barkley. And I thought this, I'm not sure how this comes out or, but anyway, Saquon has agreed to a 1 year, $11 million deal.
Yep.
Now, in this deal, it seems like the incentive uh, is like 900,000. And I know that in today's money, the money that we've been talking about, that doesn't sound like a lot of money. The deal also included a $2 million signing bonus. But then 24 hours later, the Giants signed left tackle Andrew Thomas to a 5 year, $117 million deal with $67 million guaranteed.
Yep.
I mean, if I'm Saquon, this is kind of a slap in the face. I understand he's a left tackle, and but I'm the little engine that makes this offense go.
Sure. I don't think that's up for debate, but
I mean, come on, Bill. 67 million compared to 2 million.
yep, it is a dramatic difference. It is the NBA we talked about before. NBA has some looming storm clouds they're going to have to hammer out, while the NFL is still very suspicious of anything it feels like rewarding its players or counseling them financially or things like that. I want to see more and more time spent on things like financial literacy when there's a chance to do so. The NBA has become quite a study for several reasons, and yes, there's a lot of money concentrated in just a few hands. But if someone's serious about it, housebreaking your human or whatever, there's some really good resources out there. But I I generally think of this game in which we have some of the iconic, standing, still available replicas or even originals. But uh,
So do you think Saquon should have held out for more, or
well,
because he? Yeah,
I'm pretty sure they would have called his bluff. So I don't think more was coming, no matter what. Quite frankly, James.
okay, all right.
The
The
new reality
Cowboys.
for running backs is that you have to try to agitate, and if you're going to sit out or be out, you do it early on, after your rookie or even after your second year, when they don't have you don't they can't hold on to you as long. If you were a first round draft pick, but make sure you have something in there to help you get free.
I know Don's not here tonight, but I'm going to throw this Cowboy question at you because the Cowboys gave cornerback Trayvon Diggs an extension, 5 years, 97 mil. Diggs has had 17 interceptions in his last 3 seasons. But in the meantime, their best offensive lineman, left guard Zach Martin, is holding out. What do you think about that situation, Bill?
So you were asking about which situation?
I'm asking about Zach Martin sitting out for the Cowboys while they signed uh, 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 Diggs to a
Right.
contract extension and made him what I think tied for the fifth or sixth highest paid cornerback in the league.
He was he did score very well. Zach Martin is a player that has certainly earned his stripes in the NFL. And this is the thing about NFL front offices. They don't care what you've done, they care about what you're going to do. They don't pay based on the past, they pay based on the present. And maybe for whatever reason, Mr. Martin had made a strong enough presentation regarding his value to the team in earthenworks and things like that. It won't be easy, and unfortunately, we've lost some people even trying to, get our point across on this. But I feel like you are the one.
Uh, Josh Jacobs is yet to sign the franchise tag. As a matter of fact, he's even left Las Vegas, so he doesn't have to get fined or anything like that. But Josh Jacobs is the most valuable piece. Is he the most valuable piece in the Raiders offense? He led the league in total yards last season with 2,053. And Devontae Adams has said, "Hey, pay the man." What do you think?
Well, players support each other. I mean, it, what's Miami's going to come out and say, "Look, man, you're a running back. You don't deserve it." I mean, he was the leading rusher in the league. He had over 1,500 yards. You can't say he doesn't deserve it, but the hard, cold, cruel, and frankly unfair realities of the modern NFL is that a team figures like they can get probably 80% or around 80%, and maybe even more, of your production from another player or players that are cheaper. I believe they're much cheaper. They're going to do that. That's been demonstrated. I mean, Dalvin Cook found out, right? We just talked about Austin Eckler. Even Saquon didn't get he got an extension, but he didn't get the deal he was looking for. So I don't think any of this changes until something happens regarding our independent schools, exactly, so that you can start examining and looking at and figuring certain things based on, that young man and where it takes you.
Okay, let's see. Let's talk about the Chargers and quarterback Justin Herbert. They gave him a 5 year extension worth 262.5 mil, uh, 218.7 mil guaranteed. Uh, Herbert is the first quarterback in NFL history to throw for 4,000 yards in each of his first 3 seasons. But Bill, Herbert is only 25-24 as a starter. Your thoughts?
About the record.
Yeah, about the record, about do you think that he deserves that type of money with the record? I mean, what's your thoughts on Herbert in general and the Chargers?
Well, I mean, the Chargers have had to overcome Brandon Staley. One time, he literally came into the locker room and thanked the guys for pulling his fat out of the fire. He better get it right this year. He's made some, sometimes understandable, sometimes mistakes. I think just come from being overeager and so new. But this is an incredibly important year. They need to take a step forward, not only with the sort of main storyline, but what's going on with other things. You asked about, so the Chargers have, they're soon to be, have a quarterback they're soon going to figure out how they're going to keep him long term, and a few other shortstops and things like that, like first generation, low income but great players.
No shortstops in football, Bill.
What's that you said?
No shortstops in football.
Oh, right, yes. Well, not yet. There aren't. Well, Kyler Murray, but he also played some outfield. But the money is, as we talked about, very unevenly distributed right now in the NFL. Quarterbacks, even ones that are just good, are getting, not quite baseball, not quite basketball, but very considerable long-term contracts with a lot of money, including a fair amount of guaranteed money. And it's going the opposite direction for running backs. Top flight corners and pass rushers are getting, the numbers pointed in the right direction for them. For a lot of other positions, it's kind of stagnated. And like I said, for running backs, it's so hard to get real money. So, like I said, if you're a young running back, have a great rookie season, hold out then, right? Hold out right away after that. So you can maybe get an extension while you're still seen as valuable.
The Bills, Coach Sean McDermott says he's seen a different Josh Allen this offseason. Allen had 14 interceptions last season, tied for second most in the NFL. Bill, is Josh Allen the best quarterback in his division? And are the Bills the team most likely to implode and miss the playoffs this season?
In his division, yes, he's the best quarterback in his division. Are they likely to implode? I won't say likely, but I could see the potential for them imploding because of, we've talked about already some of the things going on with Mr. Diggs and just sort of, so there's some of their general dynamics around, the franchise in the locker room.
The Chiefs defensive tackle Chris Jones is officially holding out of camp. Jones wants a new contract. He had 15 and a half sacks last season. He wants something more than Williamson got from the Jets. But is Jones the Patrick Mahomes of the defense for the Chiefs?
It's funny. I was just talking to someone earlier today about how misunderstood Chris Jones is and how great he is. So, things you love about him. I mean, you're talking about a human being who's 6'5" and 310 pounds, but can move well enough that he can line up outside as a pass rusher. He can line up inside as a 3, which is sort of his natural position, the 3 tech. But I've also seen him play 5. I've seen him play 6, He can play any position that doesn't require that he be run sub 4.7. He can play it. He can do that on defense. He's that good a player. He understands the game at an ultra high level. He's studying where. I just think that he has a chance to have a season we have never seen before this year.
Okay. Jared Dublin of CBS Sports says that Rashawn Bateman is one of his candidates for breakout player of the year. with the over-under of 9 games, who plays the most games, Bateman or Beckham?
You said between who and who?
Bateman and Beckham.
Oh, wait. Okay, Odell Beckham Jr. and who was the other person? Oh, Bateman, Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman to me is the number one, and I think Odell Beckham Jr. is in the fight for the number two.
That's not what the question is. Over or under 9 games, who plays the most games,
Oh, I think.
Bateman or Beckham?
Oh, I think the over. I'm betting the over on Bateman. I think it's over 9 games.
Huh. Okay. Even considering the record that he's missed the last 2 years.
Oh, I'm very aware. I mean, we talked about him when he was at Minnesota on the show. I've been following him for years. I think he pulls it together and stays healthy this season.
Okay. Deshaun Watson says being able to open the whole offense is going to be special. Do you think that Watson will lead the Clowns back to the playoffs?
Yeah, I think he gets sorry. No, I don't think he gets the team in the playoffs. I think they come up very close though.
Close as in hand grenades and horseshoes?
Right. Not counting no.
Let's see. The Panthers signed their number 1 overall draft pick, Bryce Young, to a 4-year, $37 million deal. That includes $24.6 million signing bonus, and it's fully guaranteed. What's success for the Panthers this year? 8 and 9? Or some other figure? Do you think 8 and 9 is a good season for Bryce Young?
Oh, if they go 8-9, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a good season, but it's about right. I think that the ceiling on them is about 10. The floor is 7. So, you pretty much nailed the middle point between the high and the low. I think if everything goes right, they can win as many as 10, but I think that's unlikely. I think more likely they discover, what's driving the driving force in their society, and they sort of stick with it.
Okay. Bucky Brooks names Najee Harris as one of his 10 running backs who are the engines for their offense. Bill, how many new faces do you predict will be on the 53-man roster? And most experts say that the Steelers are proposed to win 8.5 games. Are you taking the over or the under?
8.5 games for Pittsburgh. I mean, push. I guess gun to my head, I'll take the over at 9.
And how many changes are you looking for in the 53-man roster, considering how many rookies we've already signed?
Right.
Joey
Good
Porter
question.
just inked his deal, yesterday?
Oh, okay. Huh. Okay, what? I think. Let me see. So you're asking about players that.
No, I'm just saying approximately how many new faces do you think that we're going to see on this new 53-man
On the
roster?
Panthers 53-man roster?
On the Steelers.
Oh, still. Not a bunch. Maybe 6.
Okay. And what did you think about Bucky Harris saying that Najee Harris is one of the top one of the quarter running backs that has to have a good performance this year in order for the Steelers to be successful?
So you said success. What would qualifies as a successful season?
For Najee Harris.
Right. Well, I think about 1,320 yards rushing and about 480 yards receiving. And I guess combined, let's just say 11 touchdowns.
Who estimates the most improvement this year? Pickens or Johnson?
Oh, wow, that's interesting because they're so different. But I guess in this scenario, you're not allowed to just sort of help out. So I'm going to go with what were the options again?
No, I was saying we were talking about who you think will have the better year, Pickens or Johnson?
Right. Oh, Deontay Johnson versus Pickens. I'm going to go Pickens. I think he breaks out. I think he emerges.
Okay. Oh well, Bill. Hey, just me and you. I guess we got through the program pretty good. Oh, one thing I have to show this week. Um, I was going to do this last year, but since I won, I thought it would be inappropriate for me to do this. But this year, this is our shirt for the football fantasy champion. As you can see on the back, it says 2023, the SPORTSKRIB football champion. So, little extra incentive for our fantasy football guys. Uh, I'm going to be showing it every week until we draft. So, Bill, I think I beat out you and Mike last year. So I'm going to hope to keep the shirt at home. But we'll see. So give me your final thoughts for the evening, Bill.
Well, first of all, it's always a pleasure to have Jeffrey, and I look forward to the next time we have him on. He's a terrific person and so plugged into pretty much everything, right? Soccer, basketball, baseball, football that goes on in the ACC. So my final thought focuses on, and touches upon that on this day in, let's see, the year of on this day in 1959, Larry Doby, who I've talked about at least once before on the show, played his final Major League Baseball game on the 26th of July of the year 1959. Retires, and then he retires again after playing for the Chinoochee Dragons in 1962, when it was clear that he was, well beyond his best days. And I've mentioned before how Larry Doby has not been, in my mind, sufficiently regarded and recognized. I would really like to see there to be at least a Larry Doby Day where they celebrate the day that he comes up, especially in every American League ballpark, where he broke through to the majors. Maybe there should be placards or something with his number on them, his number 14, and at least a video, tribute to him. He was a terrific player. He was a terrific person, and he put up with a whole heck of a lot, but has not been really lionized, remembered, or immortalized the same way that Jack Roosevelt Robinson was. And there's still time not time while he's still alive, but there's time to fix it for future generations who I think don't have a really good sense of. I think they sort of think like Jackie Robinson breaks the color line, a couple of days of, mean things are said, and then that's over, and now everything's fine. It was not like that. And Jackie, being a National League player, certainly dealt with some things, but at that time, the American League had more southern in quotes, because there were no teams in what we would now consider the South, but Washington, D.C. had had an American League franchise, and then you had St. Louis and somebody I'm forgetting. Oh, and the St. Louis Browns and the St. Louis Cardinals. Both were sort of considered Southern teams, and it was rough for black players who played there. And Larry Doby put up with all that. So I would like to see him thought about more, talked about more, and action taken to recognize his memory.
Truer words there. My grandfather's favorite player. I remember, like I said, going to uh, watch him when he was playing for the Cleveland Indians. One of the best days I remember was out with my grandfather watching Larry Doby and the Cleveland Indians.
Right. He came. Yeah, good point. Good
Yeah.
point. But yeah, I'm glad that we got to talk about him a little bit. And I look for opportunities to discuss him. I wrote an article about him that was published a few weeks ago. And if you are a fan of his or know people who were, check out the article on Team MBS Sports.
All right, Bill. Well, hey, man, you have a great day, man, and look forward to talking to you next week.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to start my political series back pretty soon, and we'll get our Mondays back also. So,
okay.
Hey, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week right here on
See
the
you in 1
Sports.
week. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.